I have a body of stories. Stories in my hips, stories in my toes, stories in my lips, and stories in my nose, stories in my fingers, stories in my fists, stories in my elbows, stories in my wrists, stories in my wiggle, stories in my walk, stories in my giggle, stories in my talk, stories in my liver, stories in my spleen, stories where I'm going, stories where I've been. I have a body of stories. Stories that are saucy, stories that are sweet, stories in my crown, and stories in the balls of my feet. Stories in my tissues, stories in my tum, stories in my sinews, stories in my bum, stories in my heartbeat, stories in my marrow, stories sizzling in my cells, stories wide and narrow, stories full of nonsense, stories wise and true, stories just for me, and stories just for you.